Hey everybody, this is Dream. We have two really big slates here with college basketball having a 7-game slate and NBA having a 13-game slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? I'm going to cover both slates here. We have some interesting slates on this one, and I'm going to talk a little bit about strategy as well in this particular video, just to kind of showcase that since I have both slates available here. For college basketball, we'll start with the strategy here. We are going to want to try to get everybody to at least 4x. That's going to be the requirement for doing well in college basketball. As for NBA, we want everybody to do 5x or better. That is really the minimum requirement for most of our players. So do keep that in mind when building your lineups. You do want to make sure you feel like your guy can score based on the price. So for instance, Okani here is $7,000. We need him to 4x. That's about 28 fantasy points. Looking over on DraftKings for Simmons, he is $6,800 and he would need 34 points to pay off there. So you can kind of see the difference from that perspective. With that said, let's get into the injury report here first for college basketball. We really only have two guys that are questionable on this slate, and one is Boston College's Harris Jr., he is questionable, and one is Duquesne's Williams, who is questionable. Those are the only two guys that really are going to have any impact at all. Trey Williams here being for Duquesne. And then for Boston College, where are they at? We've got Harris Jr. here, who is questionable and unlikely to play. So, but those two injuries really aren't going to make much difference on the slate. As we look at the totals for these games, all the games are pretty close with the exception of the Manhattan Fairleigh Dickinson game, which has 151 point total. Everybody else is below 140. We're also going to notice that Manhattan is a 2-point favorite in that game, so it's also a tight game. So that would be an interesting game to potentially stack here. Looking at the other games, we do have two blowouts with Harvard and Army at risk of blowout, and also Dickinson at St. Peter's at risk of blowout. Oh, sorry, we have a third one as well, Boston College and Holy Cross. That game actually has the biggest total spread on the slate at minus 21.5 in Boston College's favor. So do keep that in mind as we go through. I have two bets for this slate as well. One being Quinnipiac against Navy. I expect them to money line that. It is a pretty high. I think it's right around 200 there on that one. So do keep that in mind. But I do like Quinnipiac to win that game. And then Eastern Michigan plus 6.5 versus Oakland. I think that game will probably be pretty tight, and I do think Oakland wins, but I think Eastern Michigan will cover that spread. So that is what I have for that here. So let's get into our plays. Now I'm just going to go through the plays in order of price. We do have quite a few on the slate as we have some really good opportunities for this particular slate, and so that gives us a lot of potential in this one. So let's go ahead and get started here. So we'll start with Quentin Post for Boston College. Now he's the most expensive player on the slate. He's had some inconsistency throughout the season, but he draws a good matchup here as their team is expected to win by 21 points. But that's really the risk that he has, is if it becomes too much of a blowout, he may not play a full complement of minutes. Obviously, if he played, close to 35 plus minutes, he would definitely pay off from that perspective. But at this price point, he needs about 38 fantasy points, and if he doesn't play a full complement of minutes, he would definitely have a lot of risk. So he is fairly risky with that potential blowout game there. Then we're going to look at Akuf for Eastern Michigan. Now, I really do like him a lot today. He is pricey, but he's been really solid throughout the entire season. He's only had a couple off games to start the year, but he's been really good ever since, and I like the potential here. I expect this game to stay pretty close and score a lot of points. It is the second highest total score on the slate, and so he draws a lot of potential as their best player. Then we'll look at Malik Mack for Harvard. He's also fairly expensive here, but he also draws some good potential. Though the last game he didn't do very well, Harvard should be able to win this game pretty handily, and that should bode well to his fantasy upside. As in most games this season, when they've at least been close, he has done very well and has a high ceiling. He is going to be somewhat hard to roster at the price point, though, because of the lack of value on the slate. Then we're going to look at Jimmy Clark the third for Duquesne. They have really good potential in this game with a 14-point favorite against St. Peter's. He's also played very well and solid this season. He needs around 33 fantasy points to pay off here, and he's been pretty solid throughout the season. He had a couple rougher games, but with a positive matchup here, he should be able to take care of business and do pretty well. I do like Donovan Draper a lot for Navy, even though they aren't favored to win the game. I think Navy will keep it close, and I expect him to have a big game here. One of the goals for Quinnipiac uh, will be to actually slow him down, as he's had some monster games for his price. Then we're going to look at Okapara uh, for Harvard. Now they are favored to win this game, and while he's been inconsistent throughout the season, he has some nice upside at this price point and matchups where he's favored to win pretty handily, and this definitely looks good for him. Obviously, the point total for most of the games is pretty low, but he's a good play on the slate. Then we'll look at Zachary for Boston College. Now he's had some really good upside games in this season so far. His floor is around 20 fantasy points, which he's hit a few more times than I'd like at the price point. Because he does need 30 fantasy points to pay off here, but he's got a very favorable matchup here, and he should be able to get a full complement of minutes, even if it gets out of hand, and get close enough to the fantasy points that we need to pay off here. Then we're going to look at Trayor, uh, for Manhattan. Now, this game is one of the highest scoring games on the slate, and Traore has played very well. His price is really fair here. I was very close to making him a core play as well. He needs right under 30 fantasy points. Honestly, the only reason I didn't is because he's had a couple off games. The last few games where his minutes have been a little bit more limited, possibly due to fouls, and he does tend to be a little bit more scoring dependent than I'd like, but he definitely draws some potential in this game, and he can play guard or forward, which definitely gives you some advantage here. Then we're going to look at Octave um, for Holy Cross. Now, he's extremely high risk, as this matchup is rough for them. But if anybody's going to do good on this team, it's going to have to be him. Even in blowouts, he's done okay, though he's had two blowouts where he didn't. And so we'll have to, obviously it's a risk, but he definitely carries the potential and is the safest play from Holy Cross if you want to use anybody from that team. Then we're going to look at Okani. Now, he is a core play for me for UIC. This game has a 1 point spread, and I think that he's going to play pretty well in this one. He's a little bit underpriced here at $7,000. He needs 28 fantasy points to pay off here, and he's actually been over that in all but one game on the season. Now, obviously, this is a little bit of a tougher matchup, but I think he's very capable of paying off on this slate, so he is a core play for me. Almanor for Farley Dickinson also in play at $7,000. He's had a couple floor games this season, but overall he's been solid all season long, and he needs 28 fantasy points to pay off here. He's played very solid in most games this season, so I'm gonna, the fact that they got blown out against Ford is irrelevant to me here, considering this game should be pretty close and has a really high total. I expect him to do very well in this game. He was very close to being a core play as well. Then we'll look at CJ Jones for UIC, excuse me. Now, he's my third favorite player from UIC, but he is in play on this slate. He's got some potential today. His price is pretty fair. I felt like UIC is a little bit underpriced for this matchup against Jacksonville State. I expect this to be a low-scoring game, but it's also a tight spread, so everybody should get a full complement of minutes, and he's played fairly well throughout the season. Then we're going to look at Reed for St. Peter's. Now, if you're going to use anybody from St. Peter's, he'd be the top option. Obviously, he's had some bad games, and they are a pretty lethargic scoring team, but his price is still pretty good. He needs 26 fantasy points to pay off here. Obviously, he's been pretty close to that in most games this year. He does carry a lot of risk, but he definitely can occasionally have an upside game where he can reward you for using him. Then we'll look at Riviera. Now, I like this pick better than Jones because he's got about the same ceiling and floor, and he's a little bit cheaper than Jones. He should get a lot of minutes too, and this game being close definitely helps him. He also has a pretty good ceiling at $6,400. He needs right around 25 fantasy points to pay off, and he's been able to get that in most of the games this year. Obviously, this game being close definitely helps. Then we'll look at McLaughlin uh, for Boston College. Now, he has some nice upside in this matchup. Boston College should obviously win this game by a lot, but he definitely has some potential here, though they've had a couple floor games when they've blown people out, so that is a concern here. But his price is cheap enough that he's worth a look, as he only needs 24 fantasy points, and he can definitely do that. But he does carry a little bit of risk. Then we'll look at Piggy for Harvard. Now he is favored in this game to win, and while he's had some tough games the last four, he's been pretty good most of the season. So he definitely has some potential here, though his floor is lower than I'd like at this price point. But he's definitely like a GPP play if you want to do that. Then we'll look at Age of War for Harvard. Now I like him a lot better than I like Piggy, as he's been very good throughout the season. He had a couple floor games against IU and UMass, but I expect this game to be a little bit easier for them, and he should be able to be a bit higher. He only needs about 23 to 22 fantasy points here to pay off, so I think he's a great play on the slate and a lot safer than Piggy. Uh, then we'll look at Lampin for Oakland. Now he's played very well so far in the last game against Toledo after missing all but the first two games. His price is a little bit high, but at this price point, he needs 22 fantasy points. I think he's definitely capable of doing that in this game. It should be a relatively tight game, and has a pretty good ceiling of total points. So I think he's in play on this one, though he does carry a little bit of risk. Then we'll look at Reyes for Quinnipiac. Now he definitely has some uh, potential today. His price is pretty solid. He's been mostly good throughout the season. At 20, he needs about 22 fantasy points, so we get it within a couple points of that, he should be fine. And this is a good matchup for him as well, as they should be able to beat Navy. Then we'll look at Osonick. Uh, Sorry if I'm butchering your names and stuff. He has played very well for Eastern Michigan in certain situations. And even though he's had two really bad floor games, his price is cheap enough that he's worth a look today, as he's played very well the last few games, especially in a game where they should be able to keep it close, and he has some nice potential here. Then we'll look at Corey Washington. Now he's one of my probably favorite value plays when it comes to the sub 6,000 plays. He's played somewhat inconsistent in the four games he's played, but he's going to keep getting a little bit good amount of minutes, and if he is somewhat scoring dependent, but his price is cheap enough where he only needs to get right around 20 fantasy points to pay off, and he's got that potential today, and so he does draw some upside in this matchup, though he definitely is risky for St. Peter's. And then we'll look at Mitch Fisher for Navy. He's probably the cheapest play that I like on the slate. Now, he doesn't have a high ceiling, but he also has a pretty good floor, as he's only had one game under 10 fantasy points all season, and he only needs around 18 fantasy points to pay off, which he's very capable of getting close to. Obviously, he carries some risk, and a lot of these sub 5,500 guys are kind of Hail Marys, but they're the best options on the slate. Uh, so that's what I have for college basketball. Let's move over to the NBA real quick and get through that here. So we have an extensive injury report for the NBA. We're going to start with that here. So we have the Pistons with Durant out, the Magic with Suggs and Isaac are questionable. Carter Jr. is out and Fultz is out. For the Hawks, Trae Young is questionable and Jalen Johnson is out. For the Hornets, Mark Williams is questionable and Ball is out. For the Wizards, Gafford is questionable and Wright and Shamet are out. For the Nets, Simmons and Walker are out. For the Celtics, Porzingis is probable. For the Cavs, LeVert is out and Mobley is questionable. For the Heat, Bam is out, Hero is out, and Highsmith is out. For the Warriors, Peyton is out. For the Timberwolves, McDaniels is out. For the Grizzlies, Smart, Kennard, Adams, Morant, and Clark are out. For the Bulls, Levine remains out. For the Rockets, Thompson remains out. For the Kings, Duarte is questionable. For the Suns, Durant, Beal, and Allen are out. For the Mavericks, Grant Williams, Josh Green, and Cleaver are out. For the Trailblazers, Grant is out. Ayton is doubtful. Williams is out, and Brogdon is questionable. For the Clippers, Plumlee is out. And for the Jazz, Clarkson and Olenek are questionable, and Markkanen is out. So I'm going to do my top plays at first here for them, and then we're going to I have some contrarian options as well. So we'll start with Joker. Obviously, Joker's been absolutely dominating all season long. He's probably going to be MVP again this season. He's averaging a monster amount of fantasy points per game. His price also dropped $500 from what it was last game, and he gets a nice plus matchup against Houston. The big risk here is a blowout, which is definitely possible, but I think that he'll still manage to score a ton of fantasy points in this one. Looking at Joel Embiid, he's been absolutely dominating every single game lately, and he gets a nice favorable matchup here against Atlanta, and so he should be a little bit of a higher pace game, and he should be able to even get more fantasy points as a result. I look for him to get over 60 fantasy points in this one, though he's going to be somewhat hard to roster because there's not a lot of value, at least yet. Hopefully a lot will open up as we get closer to lock here, especially when we get more injury information. Looking at Shea Alexander, he's played very well lately. He's been pretty steady player for Oklahoma City, and a plus matchup like this against Golden State, who he's faced twice. He's averaged 55 fantasy points against them this season, and he's played very well. So I like his upside in this matchup, even with Golden State mostly at full strength. Devin Booker looks like he'll play today, which Durant and Beal are both out, so he's going to get all the usage he can handle. And he is facing a team that doesn't play a lot of defense, so I expect him to have a monster game here, assuming he doesn't get set down eventually before the day's over. But he's definitely a great option on the slate at this point. Then we'll look at Terry Rozier for Charlotte. Now, he does face a tougher match against Toronto, but since Ball has gone down, he is going to be a monster usage player, and he's been absolutely dominating 3 of the last 4 games since he's been out, and I like his upside in this matchup, despite the fact that his price is coming up a little bit. He's definitely worth a look here. He was very close to being a core play for me. Kobe White also very close to being a core play. The only reason he's not is because his price has just skyrocketed, but with Levine out, he has monster upside, as just like Rozier has. He's played very well and has good potential in this match against the Spurs, who aren't going to play a ton of defense in this one. Looking at Simmons for Portland, now he is finally back. He is a core play for me at this point. This is subject to change. In his first game back, he scored 37 fantasy points against Golden State. He gets another plus matchup here against Dallas. If Brogdon was end up back, then he would not be a core play, so do keep that in mind. But I do think he's a viable option on the slate. Then we'll look at Claxton here for Brooklyn. Now, he is very close to being a core play. His price is still pretty good. He does have a lower floor than we like at the price point, but he's facing a great matchup, and Washington is giving up more fantasy points against centers and literally everybody else. So I like his upside in this matchup and has great potential. He's very close to being a core play as well. I mean, I could include Kobe White and Claxton as core plays, as they definitely have some viability from that perspective. Cam Johnson is also a core play for Brooklyn, and he's played very well lately. I like his upside in this matchup, and he's pretty safe ceiling and floor, considering the way he's played and the matchups that they have. Again, that will probably change as a result of the matchups, but I do like him right now. Clint Capella has been absolutely dominating against Philly in the 3 games he's played this season. He's averaged, in the last game that he played against Philly, he averaged 39, or he got total of 39 fantasy points. I also noted that he had played them 3. Oh, okay. So 3 of the last 4 times he played Philly against Embiid, he had big games, and I expect that to continue here. He's got a good matchup, and he's nice, cheap price as well. Alex Caruso is probable to play today, and assuming he does play, he should get a good amount of minutes as a result of Levine being out, and he has some nice upside from that perspective, but he definitely carries some risk. Not a must-play by any stretch of the imagination. Duop Reith is also in play for Portland, assuming that Ayton misses again, which is likely. He's been pretty steady. Now, his price is not nearly as cheap as it was, but he's capable of a solid 20 fantasy point game, and that's all we really just need from him today, just to get us through, to get some more to buy up for other players. Then we have some contrarian options today. De'Aaron Fox for Sacramento, DeMar DeRozan and Nikola Vucevic for Chicago, Jalen Williams for Oklahoma City, Ivica Zubac for the Clippers, and Orlando Robinson for Miami. All have some high risk, high reward type situations, and so they're definitely in play. With that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.